And we want to get right into the Senate report released yesterday looking at the Joe Biden family's ties to Ukraine and China. The GOP issued report found that Hunter Biden's financial transactions with Ukrainian, Russian, Kazakh, and Chinese nationals raise criminal concerns. The report also finds that the former vice president's office and State Department officials were aware of Hunter Biden accepting money from these countries, but ignored the concerns relating to Hunter Biden's role on the board of Burisma. Biden's campaign accused Johnson of distracting from the global pandemic, while President Trump's campaign released a statement overnight saying, quote, "For what possible reason could all of these foreign countries and entities be shoveling money at people named Biden, if not to influence official U.S. policy?" From the campaign. American journalists have a responsibility to relentlessly question Joe Biden about all of this in detail and to call out his attempts to cover up this potentially criminal activity. Of course, we haven't had a word of this from the mainstream media. Joining me right now is Wisconsin Senator and Chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, Ron Johnson. Senator, it's great to have you this morning. Thanks very much for being here.
Good morning, Maria.
Some of these payouts are just stunning, like the money that the former wife of the former mayor of Moscow sent to Hunter Biden. I don't know what that was about, but let's go through the report and please go through the key findings. What struck you most in terms of the money that Hunter Biden accepted from these foreign countries, foreign companies, while his president was vice president, while his father was vice president, rather?
Sure. Again, we never sought to target or go after the Bidens. They put themselves in the middle of this with Hunter's glaring and obvious conflict of interest joining the board of Burisma. So this happened just a couple months after Ukraine had their revolution of dignity, which is really all about ridding Ukraine of corruption. And here we set up this glaring conflict of interest where Hunter Biden was paid $4.2 million. He and his business partner and his businesses, $4.2 million over about 30 months. But that calculates about $140,000 a month, almost $1.7 million per year. It's a pretty good gig if you've got the right last name. And let's face it, this was all about Wojcicki, the owner of Burisma, trying to gain influence so that the charges, the investigations against him in Ukraine would be dropped. One thing that's kind of notable is in George Kent's interview before our committee, he pointed out that a $7 million bribe was paid by Wojcicki, by Burisma, to make those investigations go away 7 months after Hunter Biden and Devin Archer joined the board of Burisma. And remember, Hunter Biden joined the board supposedly to consult on corporate governance and transparency. Didn't do a particularly good job. But then you hop to Russia, $3.5 million paid to Alina Baturina, the former wife of the now deceased former mayor of Moscow. She's Russia's lone woman billionaire, or a woman billionaire in Russia. Got her billions through probably corrupt practices, being the mayor's wife. We had a very strange payment from Kazakhstan, $142,000 to buy a car for Devin Archer, and then the millions of cash flow between the intricate web of corporate dealings with the Chinese nationals that have current connections to the communist government and former affiliations with the People's Liberation Army, helping arrange, for example, the purchase by and the control by Chinese business of a U.S. dual parts auto manufacturer. The type of equipment could be used for military purposes by the PLA. Again, it's such an extensive web. There's so many millions of dollars flowing back and forth with those associations. We've just only uncovered. I think we're only scratching the surface. We have no guarantee that we've uncovered it all. We just have really laid out a pretty troubling web that represents potential conflict of interest, counterintelligence, and extortion risks to a Biden administration.
Unbelievable. So you're talking about $4.2 million coming from Burisma. You're talking about $3.5 million coming from the wife of the former wife of the former mayor of Moscow. You're talking about tens of millions of dollars coming from China. Do you have evidence? Now, you just said that there was an allowance to acquire a company in Michigan by AVIC, the Chinese company that is tied to the PLA, the military of China. Do you have evidence that, in fact, policy was changed by the Biden vice president or the Obama-Biden administration in conjunction with these payouts to Hunter Biden? Was policy changed?
Well, first of all, it's hard to find smoking guns. It's even more difficult when you can't get the documents even out of an administration or the State Department that is supposedly controlled by a Republican president. The problem is his political appointees are at the top of the organization, but just right below that top layer, you still have people loyal to the Bidens that know where the balls are hidden, and they've done a pretty good job hiding the balls. But let's face it, these types of transactions require approval. Approvals through CFIUS, sometimes involve the Secretary of State. And, those approvals were given to some of these transactions. That is what is so troubling about this is we don't know the full extent of all these financial transactions, and we need to dig into it. And Maria, what is amazing is the deafening silence out of the mainstream media here. They looked at our report, 87 pages. I don't think any of them read it. But what they did instead is they just kind of shrugged and said, oh, this is just a bunch of old news. Because maybe one news outlet at one point in time reported the fact that Hunter had some connections to China. Nothing new here. There's all kinds of new, very troubling pieces of information. And what I'm hoping our report will do, because we haven't answered all the questions, not by a long shot. We've raised more questions than we actually answered. I'm hoping people will start connecting the dots. And I'm already starting to see some, at least information on the internet where investigative journalists are beginning to connect the dots with the new information that we provided.
Well, we have been connecting the dots here and on Sunday Morning Futures on Fox News. You know that. But what about an investigation? Did the former administration investigate any of this?
No, there again, as far as we can tell, there was only one person in the Obama administration that actually talked to the vice president about it. George Kent talked to the vice president's staff, but Amos Hochstein, who was a special envoy over to Ukraine, actually did talk to the vice president about how troubling this was, this conflict of interest, which, by the way, led the vice president then to talk to Hunter Biden to set up a meeting with Amos Hochstein to talk about this. Now, remember, Vice President Biden famously in the end of 2009 said he never had spoken to his son about his overseas business dealings. This sure sounds like a conversation he probably had with Hunter Biden about his position on Burisma's board. So I'm sorry to say I think we've caught the vice president in a lie, which, by the way, I never believed that was true. How can you literally fly over to China? It's not just a half-hour flight. That multiple-hour flight to have Hunter Biden on Air Force Two for all those many hours, and then Hunter Biden have his own agenda in China, which included, by the way, setting up a handshake with the vice president, with Jonathan Lee, one of his business associates. How could you not discuss that? So there's the first question I'd have for the vice president. Do you stand by your statement that you never spoke to Hunter about his overseas business in light of this new information? I think the vice president's going to have a really hard time explaining that if he is ever asked and pressed on it.
Yeah, that's a big question. If he is ever asked, we have reached out to Joe Biden many times to join me on this program and on Sunday Morning Futures. He refuses to join me. We will make the call again when I get off the air today to invite Vice President Biden on the program with me to discuss the election and more. Let me ask you about subpoenas. I mean, what about subpoenaing Hunter Biden or even Joe Biden to answer these questions? Where are the Republicans in bringing these witnesses down to face questioning and the consequences, Senator?
So I've already sent an invitation to the attorneys of both Hunter and Devin Archer. And I will note that the President Trump's family, the members of his campaign staff, did not require any subpoenas whatsoever to come and subject themselves to a transcribed interview. So Hunter and Devin, and quite honestly, the invitation is open to the vice president as well. If we're getting something wrong here, if there's an innocent explanation for these transactions, we're happy to come and listen to that innocent explanation. The problem with subpoenas, Maria, is you start going down the path of legal proceedings, and I've only got 3 months left of my chairmanship. I want to conclude this investigation by the end of this Congress so that the American people know what happened, that they have the right to know this. So subpoenas, it sounds like a pretty good idea, and they can be pretty powerful, more as a threat than anything else. But from my standpoint, this report ought to create the public pressure on Hunter, on Devin, on the vice president to start coming clean with the American public and start providing some answers. Because, again, the extortion, the counterintelligence, the conflict of interest threats that this information poses, all this intricate web of connections with foreign nationals that are part of countries that are not our friends.
We should point out that John Kerry, who was a sitting cabinet member, his son was also involved. That was Hunter Biden's partner.
Yeah, Chris Hines. And we should also point out that, this was the Burisma situation was such a awkward, that's according to George Kent, such an awkward situation for everybody in the U.S. government trying to help Ukraine rid itself of corruption, that John Kerry, 5 years later in 2019, when asked, did you know anything about Hunter Biden on Burisma's board, he denied it, even though we have evidence by testimony that he was briefed the next day. He was given clippings. He was briefed specifically by his chief of staff, who also talked to Hunter about this as well. So,
Senator,
John Kerry also lied to the American people when he denied that.
Unbelievable. We got to jump, but real quick, why is all of this taking so much time? Just like the John Durham investigation, we know there's criminality here. We know that there's wrongdoing here, and yet it takes forever. In my new book, which is out next month, The Cost, Trump, China, and American Revival, I interviewed President Trump, and I said to him, Mr. President, what's the biggest thing you've learned as a first-time president from being a businessman? He said to me, deep corruption. There are people who are protected. Do you agree with that? That there are people who are just protected, that you just can't investigate?
Absolutely. This is probably the most frustrating thing I've ever tried to accomplish, is try and get to the truth. And that's all I've been trying to get to, is the truth. If there's wrongdoing, the American people need to know it. If there's no or minimal wrongdoing, they need to understand that as well. But the fact that we can't pull documents out, even though the president wants it, the administration, the Secretary of State, they want the documents, we can't get them in a timely fashion, not by a long stretch.
And you're still waiting on documents. Incredible. Senator, thank you so much.